Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the program. This is Richard RJ Eskow, and once again, we are recording here a special episode at the People's Summit in Chicago, Illinois, and joining us now is Lisa Graves. Lisa, who is one of my favorite people, by the way, is the Executive Director of the Center for Media and Democracy, a great group that I do work for from time to time, that really tries to get behind what I would call the tissue of lies and money that is obscuring truth and hijacking the political process. How's that?
That's an excellent description. The one word version of that is corruption.
Corruption. That's a good word.
But I love the description of the tissue of it. Yes.
So let's start with this before we get to why you're here at the conference. What do you think is the underlying challenge we face when we look at even the title of your organization, Center for Media and Democracy? What is the challenge we face with media right now?
Well, I think there are a number of challenges with media, but one of them is the fact that there's so much disinformation being spread by a number of entities that are described as media corporations: Fox News, Breitbart, Daily Caller, a whole array of right-wing sites that literally are on a daily, hourly basis really spreading disinformation to their followers, to their audience. I think on the, in terms of the mainstream media, the corporate media, they've had a sort of almost a revolution in the last 6 months in terms of Trump coverage, actually doing a lot more investigative reporting than they have, I think, in many ways for many years. And so there's been progress forward with a number of outlets in terms of the intensity of their coverage of the corruption, the level of corruption by the Trump administration, and yet those are commercial outlets. There are things that they still don't cover. Meanwhile, the president is assaulting them as fake news, attacking CNN, attacking the New York Times, and you have these handmaidens for the president, for the right, in Fox News, in Daily Caller, and Breitbart, and these other outlets, Alex Jones and InfoWars, that propaganda site. And so it's an extremely divisive climate, but that's not because the two sides are playing with the same weapons. The right-wing sites are literally spreading disinformation on an hourly basis, nearly 24 hours a day.
And what worries me about that is that when you have, I've been, as you may know, a long-time critic of distortions in the way the mainstream media reports, and the fact that where there were once maybe 100 media corporations, there are now 6, and shrinking. So, that's almost old-school media criticism. And now what worries me is that there's so much of the madness that you describe, and it's being distributed at light speed thanks to new technology and so on, social media and everything else, that I'm afraid I'm still recalibrating myself.
Yes, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? In terms of, the Washington Post does a story on Social Security disability that's extremely misleading.
Yes.
But how do you... What I'm struggling with personally,
I hear you.
How do you go after that? While on the other hand, there are these guys claiming that, the wildest things possible.
I think what you point out is one of the real difficulties we are facing right now, which is that in some ways on a lot of the Trump, I'm not sure I'd even call it agenda, the Trump personality, the Trump unfitness for the presidency, there's intense coverage, but the Washington Post is still the Washington Post, and it's still wrong on how it talks about the budget. It's still wrong in how it talks about Social Security. It continues to embrace some of the mythology that the right has built up, the Pete Petersons of the world, the Koch brothers and others on budget austerity. It still embraces that, and quite frankly, as much as I am really grateful for the tremendous investigative work that has happened and is happening through the New York Times and the Washington Post on some of these issues, including some of the climate issues, I don't know what's going to happen if there's a war, a hot war. Because the corporate media is particularly prone to falling into sort of jingoism and just this uber patriotism in a way that basically masks substantial issues involving war and peace. And so there's no cure but there has been progress, at least on some issues with the mainstream media.
You know, what has amazed me about that, and that's a great point, I'm so glad you brought up War and Peace, Lisa Graves, because what has really struck me about that has been how, you know, and I'm thinking not exclusively, maybe primarily the Washington Post, but also the New York Times, others, how they really were very public about how they were going to be champions of truth at all costs against this existential threat that is Trump. And the Post now has the democracy dies in darkness at the top of everything else. But he throws 79 cruise missiles or whatever it was at an airport in the Middle East, and all of a sudden they're all talking about how presidential he is.
I know. That was just an astonishing moment. The gap between the sort of tagline, the rhetoric, the PR that they're embracing, and that they're embracing in some ways can give them cover for continuing this long time pattern of basically trying to prop up a president when they're engaged in attacks or in missile strikes. That was an appalling moment, quite frankly, in journalism in this past several weeks. Was this the way he was covered, the way that issue was covered in terms of propping up Trump? It was extraordinary. So I think we face enormous challenges, and there's really no substitute for truly independent journalism, for independent investigative reporting that isn't supported by corporations, doesn't have any tie to the big defense industries. The type of work you do on the air through your show, Richard, I feel like the type of work we do through the Center for Media and Democracy. There are a number of other organizations out there that are doing tremendous work in these times. The Nation, Progressive Magazine, Mother Jones. I mean, there's a lot of really good journalism going on out there, and a lot of good independent journalists that need to be supported, and that may find it hard to be supported in a time when people are coming around to embracing the mainstream media more. They may not think there's a need, as much of a need.
Right. No, that's a great point. I hadn't thought, and again, we're talking with Lisa Graves, director of the Center for Media and Democracy. That's a great point, because, and there's the political equivalent to that too, that we're the resistance because we dislike Trump, but we really need something other. I mean, I guess the theme of this conference is Beyond Resistance, which, by the way, is the title of a piece I wrote in late November of last year. So,
yes, you did. Yes, in fact. Yes.
And that's right. I mean, I think you have to have an agenda. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Center for Media and Democracy and what you guys do, because I was thinking about a way to frame it. When I had my old show, The Breakdown, I did a spot for it, which, by the way, I'm told was popular with the stoners in the area, which was, I used to say, imagine that you could see the world from outer space, but with a special light, so that all you could see was the glow the glow of money in the dark as it flowed from place to place, and then match that up with empires as they write, this whole thing.
Wow,
but I kind of think that's what you guys do in a sense, is that you sort of put an X-ray onto not the globe necessarily, but our chunk of it, the United States, where the money's going, who it's going. Is that a fair description? I mean, it's one dimension at least. Is it a fair description of what you do?
I think it is, and it's actually a lovely description, because we are trying to shine a light on those dark flows of money. In particular, in the post-Citizens United period, after that terrible, really deeply erroneous, morally wrong Supreme Court decision, there's been a surge in dark money flowing through nonprofit groups. They're called C4s, 501c4s, which is part of the IRS code. Those groups are playing a disproportionate role in our elections. There's very little transparency about who's funding them, and in many ways very little transparency about what they're spending. They're trying to mask it all as supposedly issue advertising, and so you now, in numerous states and certainly at the national level, you have the presidential candidates and indeed the parties being outspent by darkly funded outside groups, really being pushed by a number of billionaires, the Kochs, the Mercers, Sheldon Adelson, and others. You can see some of that, because some of that is, there's some light, but most of it you don't see, and it's incredibly distorting. And then you have the combination of the unity of this White House with Steve Bannon, and the Mercer family in this thing called Cambridge Analytica, which spent apparently substantial funds trying to do micro-targeting through Facebook, not just ordinary micro-targeting, but really psyops, basically, through Facebook, targeting people to try to get them to vote one way or the other in a way that is not transparent at all. If you were not the demographic target, the ideological target of those ads, if you're not a reporter who's a target, you'll never see those ads. And there's no way to rebut them, and you can't unmask who the group is behind them. So we've moved from mass marketing for television advertising as the dominant force to micro-targeting in a way that the legal regime is not equipped to fully contend with that sort of micro-targeting, that less visible targeting, which in fact may be far more potent than a TV ad.
You know, Lisa, and again, we're talking with Lisa Graves, the director of the Center for Media and Democracy. I think that's an absolutely critical and fascinating point. I think that, you know, it's interesting because you take Facebook, which at this point, now, I'll just put my cards on the table. I went on record 3 years ago as saying that Facebook and Google and Amazon should be regulated as public utilities because I think they have that much power.
I believe so too.
But Facebook made a big show of issuing its sort of anti-fake news policy, its guidance, which frankly I found very difficult when I tried to tease through the rhetoric and find out what Mark Zuckerberg was actually saying. It was like unwrapping an onion and nothing's inside.
Right,
you know?
right. More onion.
And then you're just nothing.
Right.
And it's interesting because what they didn't say is we will cut down on this invisible force that we make money off of, which is micro-targeted ads.
Right.
So I think that's something that needs a lot more study. Do you really think that this is now a greater force than than television and radio ads?
I personally think it is. I don't have the financial data on that. We know that, for instance, the Trump campaign put a huge sum, tens of millions, if not over 100 million, into a PR firm called Giles, which Giles was part of the Trump campaign, but it's his firm. They then had a bunch of subcontractors. You can't see all the subcontractors. Yeah. That's actually how we uncovered other things about some of that spending because it wasn't disclosed through the FEC, and there were other ways it popped. But through Facebook now, the business model is that if you aren't the buyer of that ad and you're not the target of that ad, you don't get to see that ad. And so the ability to unmask that ad, to identify that's a front group, that's a fake group, that's really a front for the Kochs or for the Mercers, it's very difficult to do, and you can't see that ad yourself to debunk it. And so the pennies on the dollar investment for those Facebook ads versus a primetime TV ad, which is macro-targeted, is going to reach a lot of people who aren't on your side, versus reaching people that they think are persuadable based on their psyops through Cambridge Analytica. The ROI on that is enormous. Facebook can be used for good or evil, and this is a particular application designed to really distort what people believe, I think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It can be used for good or evil or sharing cat pictures, I suppose. But no,
yes, definitely.
This is really, reminds me of the title of a famous book from the late 50s, early 60s, The Hidden Persuaders by Vance Packard.
Yeah.
We're really talking about a secret. It's fascinating. I actually want to talk to you more about it than we have time to do on the air right now, but I think that's very, very important. And I also think that, when you get into the network of people, you mentioned Cambridge Analytica, owned by Robert Mercer, who has sponsored in many ways, according to reports I've read, the career of Steve Bannon.
Yes, yep.
So you get into this whole 6 degrees of separation of really an oligarchy is what we're talking about after some time, between the Kochs and the Bradley Foundation, which we've been working on together a little bit, and some of the other groups, Mercer, who nobody had heard of a year ago. Do you worry that we're moving into oligarchy?
I do. I feel like there is. I've said for a number of years that there's a disproportionate influence of corporations and CEOs on our political process. That distortion is increasing. It's magnifying at sort of record pace in terms of the very few number of people who are investing so heavily in elections and in policy, changing policies. It's a very tiny minority in reality, and it's deeply inconsistent with the idea of a democracy, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, not a government that's basically created, constructed, fueled by the deception and propaganda of dozen billionaires.
extremely well said, and for once I have nothing to add to that. So we will conclude there. But Lisa Graves, Executive Director of the Center for Media and Democracy, as always, great to talk to you, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Richard. It's an honor to be on. Thank you. Thanks.